After breaking down all 30 teams in our earlier show, we got 5 games to cover tonight. We got a bunch of injury information hitting the wire, and we are answering your questions. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a sports ethos presentation hosted by yours truly, Aaron Bruski, and welcome to all the viewers on Twitter and YouTube. And again, happy Veterans Day. A lot of injury news flying around the NBA. It's kind of the way this goes, so no complaining on this front. And just happy to have you guys back for show number 2 today. Again, we're doing 2 episodes today per day. We got special segments like the week ahead that we do over the weekend. We got buy low, sell high that we're wedging in on, I believe, Thursday nights with Ethos After Dark, which is running Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with Doc and Rick Kamla. And then we have myself today. And then on Wednesdays and Fridays, I roll with Doc at about noon Eastern time. And check it all out. Also, get into Discord, which is in the show notes, so you can get questions answered. And there's all sorts of stuff going on for both free users and folks on the premium plans inside of Discord. So definitely check that out. Let me quickly say hi to our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, and MMA. Head to BetOnline today. Get on the action with America's most trusted betting site. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so we got 5 games tonight. We got some injury information just sort of rolling in for those games. We'll get to that in a quick second. And then we will get to your questions once we break down the games. But today we've done a little something special here. We're actually opening up for everybody our layup line, which you can find at sportsethos.com. If you had a fantasy pass, you get this thing every day. And what we try to do with this is we want to give you guys as much information as useful. You can get a lot of stuff with our blurb feed for free. And there's, Lord knows there's 5 million social accounts out there putting something out there. Wading through all of that, putting on your trousers and getting through all of that stuff and trying to kind of have a coherent, cohesive approach to how you prepare for game days. It's tough out there. And that's actually part of what we do here at sportsethos.com is we want to try to make everything in your life as easy as possible. So if you get to the layup line, which you can find again at sportsethos.com, I believe this link to this article is either going to be available in the show notes or the chats. You can just click right in. The great Keston Paul. And by the way, if you don't know who Keston Paul is, he's one of the best fantasy writers out there going. And how do I know this? I know this because I read his blurbs on our blurb feed and I read his articles and I get value add from what he writes. And that I have to say in the 20 years or so, and even back in the Roto World days, we had a kind of funny saying is it's really hard to read other people's stuff if, they have ownership of their domain, meaning like they're a beat writer for a team and they cover that team and they add value for you. By all means, I want to consume that. But like, as you get further and further away from that sort of stuff, it's really hard to read things because, it's the people with their interpretations of what the information is and how much can you actually get out of it. And you only have so many hours in a day. So to read somebody's work because they add value, that in our industry is a really big compliment. I read Keston Paul. I read Mike Passador. I read guys like Mark Camaro. I read, guys like, who else do I read? Jacob Dunn. I've been reading Jacob Dunn, so like guys that are doing the work, they're in the trenches. And I read this stuff all the time. Keston's written in the layup line breakdowns of these games. So I'm going to be working off of that and we'll keep an eye on all the injury news. And I can actually do this all on one page here. So get to sportsethos.com, click into the NBA section, fantasy pass and layup line, and you'll be right where I'm at right now. Okay, let's get to it. So today, we have Cleveland at Chicago, and that's the first game that we'll be covering here on the docket. Let's get my bearings here. And interesting stuff going on with Cleveland is that they're just steamrolling everybody, and at some point in time, they need to lose now. 11-0 and -8 as the open for the line. I don't know how much that's shifted. Here you got Chicago back with Zach LaVine. And as Keston writes, it's a little bit of a conundrum here because LaVine is mostly bouncy, already finding time off the floor. trying to figure out if this Chicago Bulls team is a Bulls team with LaVine or without LaVine. I think we all sort of planned this season as it would be without LaVine for, say, the last 2/3 of the season. So LaVine in for this one. And what we want to know is what this team looks like with LaVine in and playing somewhat well. And the injuries don't appear to be fatal or trajectory changing so far. So we're going to watch, and how does this impact the play of somebody like Josh Giddey? Josh Giddey was everybody's, the apple of everybody's eye heading into the kind of the early draft season where ADPs go to crumble. And, all of that early hype for Josh Giddey has been paid back, unfortunately, with value just outside of the top 150 range. Why is that? Well, he's getting crushed in most of the areas that Josh Giddey usually gets crushed in. Also, they haven't been able to turn the keys over to Josh Giddey and just go. Where Josh Giddey is good is when he compiles a ton of stats and all of those deficient areas on defense with the three-point shooting and the percentages. Those things can be overcome when there's a ton of volume there. Well, that's not the case right now. Kobe White has been cruising kind of just fine. So he's clearly the better player of the two, even though one got drafted before the other, most of the drafts that I saw. So we're watching to see how these things morph. We're watching to see how Ayo Dosunmu, can he actually step into something of a consistent top 125 value for the rest of the season where that would make him useful for teams. Maybe he has another gear. We won't know about any of these things until Zach LaVine, the page turns, whether it's by injury or by trade. Or maybe Zach LaVine just continues to do this for most of the year and he outperforms his ADP and he's the big winner. We don't know. On the Cleveland side, Darius Garland is the guy getting all of the headlines. Oh, one last thing before I spin off of Chicago. Shout out Nick Vucevic, because you got top 10 value right now. Everybody fades you all the time. And most of the time, what you're doing is outperforming expectations. And you're doing it early this season. And yeah, who knows if that makes you a trade candidate? Who knows if that's just the way it's going to be? But shout out, you're doing well. I don't expect too much regression, but the big key question is for a player with maybe no future in the Chicago long-term picture, does something change? Because right now things are going great. It's definitely a sell high position for Nick Vucevic, but shout out for playing well early, at least in fantasy leagues. Back on the Cleveland side, Darius Garland's a top 20 player, and Donovan Mitchell is not right now. As I said in the earlier show, these two things should actually reverse themselves. Now, does this mean that Darius Garland's going to be bad like kind of Darius Garland last year or late during the playoffs last year? No, he's not. He's actually a very good basketball player, if you hadn't heard. And the Cleveland Cavaliers are a very good basketball team. And what they might be is the East, maybe equivalent to last year's Oklahoma City Thunder, where all of the pieces are starting to gel and they're very, very good. And if your team isn't also very, very good, they have the potential to come in and wreck the opposing box score, while each of their key guys, especially as Max Strus sits the bench, each of their key guys is rolling. And one of those key guys that's rolling right now is Karis LeVert, who's also producing at almost a top 50 level this season. Yes, Strus has been out, but we know this equation. This is going to be LeVert territory for at least the next week. In fact, with the Cavs playing 4 games with no back-to-backs this week, Karis LeVert is an auto start. And, he shouldn't be available on wires, yet he is, of course, as is the case in a lot of leagues that maybe are shallow or not paying attention. Karis LeVert is available out there. He shouldn't be, but that's the key storyline for this otherwise mostly boring game. And I think that's all I have to say about this one. If you'll notice in the article, we do have streams of the game. LeVert, of course, was the stream of the game. Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, Patrick Williams, Ayo Dosunmu, Jalen Smith are your other options there. P-Pat coming off of, not P-Pat, that was my old Sacramento friend. Patrick Williams coming off of 2 steals and 2 blocks in his last game. A sign of life. And I don't think it's going to be as good against Evan Mobley. So with that, I might pass on Patrick Williams, even though he's probably popped up on some radars given the last good game. Jalen Smith dealing with something or other all the time. It's really hard to get behind him, though. He has not let go of the rope. He has been productive in his kind of back end of the top 200 role, hopefully with some upside. Hopefully something happens with Vucevic. If you're a Jalen Smith backer, that's the thought process there. And that's about as much as I can say about him. I'm not very optimistic that he can even handle 25 minutes per game, but who knows? It's got to happen at some point in time, right? Let's move into the Washington Wizards at Houston Rockets. Oh, listen to you, Andre. I'm not rooting for an injury. I just spent the entire segment praising Mr. Vucevic, and I don't have hate against people from Montenegro. What the heck is going on here? Washington Wizards at Houston Rockets. Now, the Rockets just came off of a big, I don't want to call it a big game, but they're really still playing for their identity. They're also, they did come off of a very physical, hard fought. I mean, that game was just 48 minutes of both teams against the Pistons, both teams playing very hard and punching each other in the face. And now they're going to play against the Wizards. They're going to play at home. The Wizards also played yesterday, and they were not as good. They did not play in a game like that. And who knows, maybe this is the sign that the Wizards are about to become the Wizards, because they'd been a little punchy early on in this season, and now they're not so much. So who knows here? You know, it's a Washington plus 13 is looking actually kind of interesting, because yes, Houston might have enough defense and still enough, like, you know, that dog in them, that they might look at this Wizards matchup and say, hey, let's win this thing and let's win big so we can, like, you know, kind of like feel our oats a little bit and get into a winning posture around here. Maybe, yes, that's the case, but it also has letdown written all over it. So Washington plus 13 is really interesting to me for that. Key storylines in this game, as Keston so astutely points out, Keyshawn George and Bub Carrington have been big trendy names, as he writes, and I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, Keyshawn went for, I think, 500 of 1,000 fab dollars in one of my high stakes leagues, and I was on Keyshawn George as a pickup. This guy's about a top 125 value, despite shooting just about 36, 37, 38% from the field. Now, initially, when you look at something like that, you go, okay, it can only get better for him. Here's the key issue there. He's shooting about 70% of his shots from deep. And I don't know if that shot diet is changing, at least at this stage of the season. It seems like more likely that that's a shot diet than not. And then maybe in the later parts of the season that he can start to get some drives, some other shot types into his diet and get that field goal percentage bumped up. Now, will that mean less threes for him? Hopefully you're just adding additional shots of better value to the diet and not necessarily just sitting on these 3-pointers. And maybe 125 can actually look like 100, 75, and on up the ladder. Here's the big problem here is that Kyle Kuzma has been ruled in for this game. And so immediately we're going to get a test of, can Keyshawn hold value? Carrington, on the other hand, doesn't have as much competition at the guard slot. So despite him having a really down game in the last game and dealing with illness, I believe is what he was dealing with, but I need to get a confirmation on that. He's, in my mind, I've characterized that injury, as not a thing to worry about. I feel like he's better positioned to withstand whatever the upcoming storm is going to be with Kuzma back. Kuzma, of course, takes a lot of usage. The team starts to tilt toward him. I'm not necessarily convinced that Kuzma and Jordan Poole coexisting is actually a thing we should be betting into. I'm looking at that as a thing we should probably be trying to fade. In fact, the question is probably, does Jordan Poole start to fade himself? Mr. Top 15 start that's now slid back into a top 25 posture. Where does Jordan Poole slot in as the year goes on is a question that we're going to be constantly checking back in on. A lot of these stats are unsustainable. He's not going to be a defensive guy this season. He's going to have some defensive stats from time to time playing in games that are much more garbage oriented. But, you know, where is he going to settle in? And I think people who are trying to determine if they should sell high on Jordan Poole are really watching on a game-to-game basis how things are going. This game would be interesting for that perspective. Is Kuzma going to come in and knock Jordan Poole back off his sort of top 25 perch and make him more of a top 50 player? Those are things that I'm watching. Also, Keston writes, Jabari Smith Jr. is a distressed fantasy asset. And he so astutely puts it as well, but he isn't too far off what we expect him to be doing. Would I be extremely, I'm just going to read his article, I guess. Would I be extremely attached to him? not with Tari Eason and company lurking to take minutes at any opportunity. You got to read this thing, folks. I think the analysis in here is so good, and this is why you got to read the blurbs. Also available on the website for free. Also, we have some big news surrounding that coming in the coming weeks, so keep your ears to the ground for that. But the this Jabari situation, you know, I liked taking Jabari in the middle of drafts, later middle rounds of drafts, because I felt like things couldn't get any worse for the guy. And he's going to just do this, what we see right now. He's going to be doing this all season long, but you start removing layers. Now, the Tari Eason uptick is not good for him. I think Ime Udoka loves playing Tari Eason, and for good reason. He's an animal out there. He just steals the ball. He's tough. He rebounds. He gets out on the break. He hits threes. He barks. You know, him and Amin Thompson. I mean, can you imagine trying to play offense against those two guys on the floor, and you start to factor in the Fred VanVleets and the Dylan Brooks, and this is just a tough Ime Udoka inspired Houston Rockets basketball squad. And they absolutely, in that Detroit game, at the end of the game, it was their toughness that overwhelmed Detroit, and that's how they got that win. Jabari Smith Jr. doesn't exactly scream toughness, but he protects the rim, he hits threes. He's not a schmuck out there by any means. He's just a guy without a role right now. So he's going to be pretty bad, I think, until somebody or something happens, meaning somebody gets hurt or something happens to elevate him up the ladder. And you even saw Udoka try to force the action to Smith, knowing that the way things are going for Houston right now, he will be less of a factor rather than more of a factor. He's got to manufacture opportunities for Jabari to get more involved. But Keston's reading the action here really well. Jabari Smith is going to either be undervalued, he's going to be at his bottom on his graph, perhaps all season long. And that's actually not that bad. That's top 100 play. And if anything happens, I think you start to see something of a poor man's Evan Mobley situation start to play out in Houston. So these are the things that I'm watching for in this game. And Keston so astutely points out. I'm going to put a counter on how many times I point out that Keston astutely pointed out something. I'm going to say over under 20. Stream of the game, Keyshawn George for threes, points, and rebounds. I agree with that. Alternatives. Now, I don't think anybody's streaming Bilal, but I do want to point out that Bilal Coulibaly might be a top 50 guy if everything breaks correctly for him. We're starting to see defensive stats and offensive stats at the same time, and they got no other reason, or they have no reasons not to play this guy. Every reason to play this guy all the way down the stretch, and we will see what happens tonight with Kyle Kuzma back. You might actually find Bilal Coulibaly on your waiver wire if people get itchy. And if that happens, you stop what you're doing and you go pick up Bilal. Carrington is a good streamer. Corey Kispert's always a good streamer. Dylan Brooks could actually get some production. And then if somehow Tari Eason is available in your league, stop what you're doing, because he actually has the most fantasy value of anybody on the Houston Rockets right now by production. For whatever you want to, if you want to get a quick Tari Eason take, I think top 75 is easily within his reach this season, as long as he can keep that big injury history from becoming a thing. Right now, it's not an issue. Right now. Brooklyn Nets at the New Orleans Pelicans. Tons of injury stuff going on. We get Trey Murphy back in this one, and I think that's probably the biggest piece. Zion out, days that end in Y. This was if you had a vision of drafting New Orleans players, it's all starting to kind of play out. Now, does this open the door for Brandon Ingram to be less exportable, if you will? I think Brandon Ingram has wanted out of New Orleans. I think New Orleans has wanted Brandon Ingram out of New Orleans. And I think the league has just been trying to figure out how to put this piece into the jigsaw puzzle. Now, if things go way south with Zion, can New Orleans sort of reverse course on that and be more committed to Brandon Ingram rather than less committed? That's the one piece that I would like to see happening, or would like to see that piece pulled from the equation, because if you pull Zion and you pull Brandon Ingram from the equation, Trey Murphy, Herbert Jones, DeJounte Murray, the guys they want to build around, Yves Missi, Jordan Hawkins, like these guys all start to become better fantasy assets. In the case of Trey Murphy, he's a top 50 guy. In the case of Herbert Jones, he's a top 50 guy. This is what they are. they're blocked for whatever reason. And the injury history for both of those wings is certainly a concern. I mean, I think that's, with the way that the knee has been handled for Trey Murphy and then just other injuries that he suffered. I mean, he's got a little bit of risk. With Jones, he's constantly playing through contact. That has not boded well for him over the last couple of years. So both of them have that injury risk. DeJounte Murray now starting to develop a little bit of an injury history after having a bigger injury earlier in his career. So, there's some risk with these guys, but this post Ingram, post Zion, time period where these guys can really rack up stats. They're top 50 guys with challenges in the past. They've been able to put those numbers up. So it's pretty exciting what's going on in New Orleans once you kind of clear the fog out of the way. On the Brooklyn side, is Nick Claxton about to heat up? Because I think people who drafted Nick Claxton are so panicked right now. I think that they're looking at the last third of the season and wondering if he'll be around to play for that. I think they're looking at Nick Claxton and wondering, is he going to even get me to a position to be in the fantasy playoffs? I think they're like, oh, cool, you're starting. Well, I still need to see more. And you might be looking at a really small window here. If you can shoot an offer over to one of your league mates, if you're really trying to get a cheap, high-end pickup, somebody that can get you top 50 value for the next 2 months, you might be able to flip a top 100 guy to get a Nick Claxton right now. A top 100 guy with a great name, you might be able to get a Nick Claxton. And even I'm higher on Daniel Gafford than Keston is, but he was able to turn Daniel Gafford into Claxton in one of his leagues. It's there's opportunity here that you can get into Nick Claxton, and maybe he has one more slow game, but I do think they've been ramping him up, and I think what they've been doing is getting ready for him to sort of peak in about 2 to 3 weeks. And then he'll have a couple 2 to 3 months. If you play this right, basically in about a month and a half after you get the good game out of him, you go ahead and you try to turn that around into somebody else and just play the carousel game. Okay, streamers, as far as this game goes, Jose Alvarado probably isn't available, but he should be a guy to look at. Brandon Boston Jr., Rick Kamla with his connection with Antonio Daniels, who does the play-by-play for that team. He pretty much knows everything about that squad before anybody else, and then you guys get to know everything about everybody before everybody else regarding that squad. Brandon Boston Jr. has been high on their radar for a while. When all these waves started parting, or the sea started parting, they knew that Brandon Boston was a guy that they wanted to get a bunch of shots. Rick basically gave you guys the green light on Brandon Boston, and then everybody who's been paying attention has been riding that wave. Boston's been great over the last week or so, and he probably has another week or so that's going to be great. And from there, you have Dorian Finney-Smith, who's been hit or miss. Zaire Williams is probably not on my list. Clowney got a couple additional defensive stats in the last one, so I think he's actually got some intriguing upside. I think the radar, or probably the evaluation for him would be top 125 if things go well for Clowney. Not more than that. If things go better than that, that means a lot of things broke in his favor. We're talking about a 5 to 10% outlier situation there. So I'm not personally going above 125 for Clowney if things go well, but maybe the injuries have held him back. Maybe now he's starting to get right. Jalen Wilson, I think in the last third of the season will be worth a look. And then Misi's been very, very quiet lately. He's got about 3 games under his belt that are not like the 5 or 6 preceding that. Low defensive numbers, low punch. It's like the speed of the game caught up to him. Lots of different factors at play. But if he was dropped, I do think that Misi over the long haul will figure things out. And Jeremiah Robinson Earl, if you're looking for top 150 value and minutes, he's been getting about 28 to 30 minutes per game over the last week. Let's move it along to the Clippers and Thunder. Interesting dynamic going on for this game here, where you got the Thunder coming off the big Chet news. Usually teams will kind of rally around themselves. You got OKC -7, some injured star theory going on in this game. You also got a Clippers squad that their primary scoring comes out of James Harden, Norm Powell, these are their offensive engines. Zubac. Now Zubac could eat in this game. He could eat because OKC is really going to struggle to find a center matchup that's going to be beneficial for them. And it could get really, really tough if the Clippers go to that matchup and really, really punish them. Other than that, they got everybody and anybody they'd ever want to have to defend James Harden and Norm Powell. So Zubac is your DFS play tonight. Though what you might see out of OKC that could stymie that is if they understand they're cooked there and they pre-rotate everything to cover Zubac and decide to play in rotation, and they think that James Harden can't hurt them on the floaters and that Norm Powell can be coverable as their sort of beastly interior, not even interior, but it's the exterior of their defense. But all these guys can slide their feet and play with their chests up, and they can keep Powell and Harden on the perimeter despite having to rotate. I think it's a tough looking game for Harden and Powell, and I think Zubac might be the guy that eats here. But I also like OKC to cover in this game. I like them to cover in the previous game, but somebody got knocked out for 8 to 10 weeks. I don't know about buys in the wake of this 8 to 10 week injury for Chet Holmgren. I don't think Cason Wallace, I don't think like Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins are going to kind of change roles or do anything differently. I think Dort might be the first guy through the door that removes some of the floor that he's had. Both he and Caruso had a get-right game about 2 games back. Caruso has since really struggled. He's, to me, the guy that might be on the outside looking in. Dort might be the guy that has less of a floor and can be more consistent and stay inside the top 150. And keeping in mind that Isaiah Hartenstein, I don't know if he will actually come back sooner as a result of this injury, but it certainly can't help that the pressure will be on for them to do something at the center position where they are woefully thin. And given that this is going to be a game where there's going to be a lot of mismatch in the post with Zubac and possibly a lot of action coming off of that, and a team that plays small in Oklahoma City, I do wonder about the pace of this game kicking up. But you do have some noted pace killers in James Harden and Norm Powell that like to pound the air out of the ball. So I'm not quite sure how that will go. But you might see a lot of stats in this game. You might not. I think that's it. In terms of streamers, if you're looking for some alternatives here, you've got, as mentioned, Lou Dort. Kevin Porter Jr. is probably an interesting name because they might struggle to generate offense and they might need somebody who can actually beat one-on-one coverage. Chris Dunn, he's been a little light lately. I don't know if I would be looking at him very much. Nick Batum, a little quiet so far this year. I don't like a lot of these plays against Oklahoma City because, again, they got like 4 or 5 defenders that can single-handedly tilt the court on defense. And I think that they might have the defensive equation for this game figured out despite the lack of Chet Holmgren. They just got to make a decision on the rotations. Kenrich Williams is off the injury report. That's kind of interesting. I'm not racing to add Kenrich Williams in almost any format. It's a question that just kind of popped up here in the chat. But it wouldn't be surprising if he reached up and had some sort of value. Just somebody to watch, I think, at that until we see how things go here. I'm going to get us into Sacramento and San Antonio so we can get into your questions here as quick as possible as our last preview of tonight's action. Mentioned this in the last show. De'Aaron Fox is dealing with a finger injury. It's on his shooting hand. It's his pinky. It's taped quite significantly to the third ring. They showed it on the ring finger. They showed it on the telecast. Even his thumb is getting some support. I think that hand is just taking a beating. Most NBA players are dealing with hand-based injuries throughout the entire season. The issue, I think, that's sort of staring everybody in the face is that the three-point shooting for Sacramento has been really, really bad. When you mix that up with issues involving adding DeMar DeRozan for about 20 shots a game, people's numbers are weird. They're not bad. Domantas Sabonis is a top 20 play. Keegan Murray is a top 80 play despite having all of the challenges of the aforementioned. So these guys are doing fine. It's just you want to see better three-point shooting percentage from them. You want to see better shooting in general from them on the floor. And in the case of Fox, he is on a major three-point shooting cold streak, and everybody's looking at that finger as the reason why. Now, he still plays the rest of the game kind of just fine. He's still dominant. He's still taking and making tough shots inside the 3-point line. So if he has a problem with that finger, which he has said is a problem, he said it's uncomfortable. Even Mark Jones, who calls the game, actually got caught on a hot mic just saying bluntly that Fox said it's bothering him. Okay, it's bothering him. We get it. Is it the follow through on the 3-point shot that's causing that to be an issue? Is it the general discomfort that's causing that to be an issue? Or is it more a team-wide malaise and bad three-point shooting becoming contagious? My guess is that you see the Sacramento Kings have a 60% 3-point shooting game, if not this game, because Wemby makes things a little bit weird. In the next game or the game after that, you see them all get right straight across the board, and then we'll have to figure out what the deal is with the finger injury. The one last thing on the finger injury for Fox is he did not have a steal or a block in the last game. That would lead you to believe that maybe there is something there, that he's not just, kind of throwing himself at deflections and things like that. I don't think that's also the case, because that's just not the style of play that he's having right now. I think that was more of an anomaly. Now it sounds like I'm making some excuses for De'Aaron Fox, but I'm not. I think that he turns the corner on these particular issues in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then you just hope that he doesn't re-injure it somehow, because it is more susceptible than a healthy hand. I think that's the most that anybody's talked about De'Aaron Fox's hand in a long time. Malik Monk was injured last night, and he's not playing in this one. They're probably getting an MRI. We'll probably get an update on that report here in the next 6 hours. And if I had to guess, based on what I saw, it would be a 2 to 3 week absence. And I think it'll actually be good for this team. Not that he is a problem, but they just have too many cooks in the kitchen. Kevin Huerter will get comfortable. Keon Ellis will get comfortable. The DeMar DeRozan stuff, how they handle fourth quarters. Right now, they have 3 guys to handle 2 jobs: DeMar DeRozan, De'Aaron Fox, and Domantas Sabonis. And right now, they're going to DeMar and just letting him cook. And he's doing well, but it is gumming things up a little bit. And I think you probably want that to go in thirds. You want to have Domantas get a third of the touches. You want to get Fox get a third of the touches, and DeMar get a third of the touches. But adding this piece was always going to have that caveat of, was it too much ball handling and usage and not something else that you could have gotten somewhere else? And I do actually like the fact that they acquired him. Now they just need to get a big man to handle the vertical issues that they have. So we'll see what happens, what they look like without Monk. And if anybody's got Keon Ellis just sitting out there, he's been a top 115 guy in very limited minutes and touches. And I don't know if your league only plays top 75 guys. Maybe that's not doing the trick for you. But I do think with this Monk news, it gives him even more opportunity. And I think he's just going to get better as the season goes on. So we're watching for all of that. On the San Antonio Spurs side, Stephen Castle just had a 23-point game. Devin Vassell just had a big game. I want to see what this does to Julian Champagnie. Julian Champagnie's probably going to get his 25 minutes for the rest of the year. He's been about a top 125 guy. With those 25 minutes, I think that's probably just the way it goes for the rest of the year. And similarly, the conversation about Ellis, if that works for you, great. If you play in a league that only top 75 plays for whatever reason, then maybe those things don't work out for you. But top 125 value is quite good. It's people that get drafted in the 9th or 10th round. That's pretty good. So, and both of those guys, their roles are fairly consistent. They're going to get their 25 minutes the rest of the way for the most part, and things can only get better for them. But in this San Antonio situation, Stephen Castle has some issues with the stat set, with efficiencies. That makes the bad games really bad. But with Jeremy Sohan out for a considerable amount of time, this is probably the window for Castle to establish his 25-minute role, his touches. There's just a little bit of a crowd right now. Chris Paul is still healthy. And Castle in his last game came out and he shot with such conviction. He took great shots. He had great pacing. So you see the talent is there. It's just the stat set, and it's just going to be weird with Wemby. Wemby and the Spurs are trying to figure out Wemby, and teams are trying to figure out Wemby. And what you're seeing is a lot of Wemby trying to catch a post-entry pass, reestablishing position. Ball kicks out, ball swings. 3 guys are on Wemby. So what are we going to do with that? And all this just because Wemby's that good. So how this all changes over the course of the season is I think the Spurs will get better at isolating Wemby where they want to isolate Wemby. I think teams are going to get tired of being punished after triple teaming him. And as the team improves around Wemby, I think the balance of Wemby taking on too much attention and guys not knowing to do with it will tilt toward Wemby just being damn effective and teams not being able to stop it. and Spurs players getting better at playing off of it. So I think that the line will continue to rise for Spurs players. And the question just becomes, is there anything to help ease the pressure of too many players for a guy like Stephen Castle? So does Chris Paul get hurt, basically? Or do they turn the page? Do they start tanking and then pull some guys out of the equation? What happens at the trade deadline or before? Attrition can be the thing that unlocks Stephen Castle, and it can possibly coincide with the Spurs getting better at what to do with this generational talent known as Wemby, who's really getting a lot of attention from defenses right now, and with like smaller, more quick defenders that are forcing these resets. I think teams are willing to let Wemby take the catch, have to reset, and get the Spurs late in the shot clock, and they'll just get better at that over time. If you're looking for streams, if they're available, Keon Ellis and Julian Champagnie are the easy answers here. Herder's been very good. I think Herder should be owned in most standard leagues outright. I don't like Trey Lyles. I think that he's got a lot working for him against him body-wise. Harrison Barnes in a get-right game. I think they actually probably feed him a little bit more in this game. Collins has been heating up a little bit. A lot of different options in deep formats for you guys to check into. Okay, let's get to your questions here. Got a bunch of questions in the last show, so I'll try to go as fast as I can. Let's see here. Okay, Discord users, we're going to get to you guys first. Our premium subscribers will get the answers to their questions faster, and we just want to repeat the most recent ones here on the show. So let's go for it. Why don't you figure it out? Asks a really good question. I saw this earlier. It's do I got to drop Herb? If you're going to go with hard H here, I think you got to go Herbert. Herb just doesn't do it for me. We're going to drop Herb or Benedict Mathurin. And Mathurin, I was moving this around in my head as we were getting ready for the show, and I think it comes down to this. If you want to take a plunge on Mathurin, and you're looking at what Mathurin's doing right now, and he looks legitimately really hard to cover. I was almost going to say uncoverable, but I don't think it's at that level. But he's got such explosion. He's got incredible poise. He's got great moves. He's just, he's got almost the total package there. You're picking him because you believe that as a young player, he will stay out of more contact and stay healthier than Herbert Jones. That's the only rationale. Because Benedict can put up 30-point games and he can get the headlines, but he's not going to get you the stats across categories that have the higher valuations that Herbert Jones gets you. Herbert Jones gets drop questions every season, and then he puts up a top 40 finish or a top 50 finish or a top 60 finish. And sure, it's heavily concentrated in steals, but hey, steals are a category too. So dependent upon your needs and your punt builds, maybe that influences this question. But I think the only way you go against Herbert, who, by the way, playing for that New Orleans team, as mentioned, might just rise to the top real quick. And there's a lot more offensive game for Herbert that people have not been able to see. And if he gets a chance to just play and there's not so much pressure on shots, you might start to see more of this and get a little bit more versatility and get a little bit more safety from games that are really down in the scoring departments. Herbert has more that he can show, and he's already shown you a lot with top 40 to 60 finishes when he's upright. Herbert is my move here, despite the fact that the momentum looks against him, and Benedict might feel right over the next 2 weeks. I bet I can't say Herbert 5 more times. Herbert. All right, let's get to Big Mon 87. Would you guys give up Jordan Poole for Jimmy Butler? Jimmy Butler is really struggling right now. His free throw is bad, and that's where a lot of his value comes from. He had a couple bad early games. His per game valuation's in the tank. It's like at the top 140 range or something. And now this ankle injury. So people are panicked about Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler entered the season with more momentum on the games played side than I'd seen out of him. He entered the season focused and ready to play. And I really do think that Miami put him in his place. And whether he wants to be in Miami, whether he's pissed about that, whether they're pissed at him, whether they've turned the page, whatever the case may be, you piss a guy like Jimmy Butler off. He might show up in your gym if you're Minnesota and kick the crap out of the first team with the backups. Does he have that type of game left in him? I think so. Does he got issues? Yeah. Yeah, he's an injury risk guy. Yeah, he tweaked his ankle in like the third game. He's been playing through it. And that might be why the numbers are so bad. This injury doesn't make him better for fantasy GMs. It makes him more complicated. On the other side, you got Jordan Poole running top 15 numbers. He slid down to top 25, just kind of doing Jordan Poole stuff in the sense that he's scoring, he's getting you points, rebounds, and assists, or not rebounds, but he's getting you good popcorn numbers. He's getting you 3-pointers, but he's got defensive stats as well. Like Poole's just cruising, and there's nobody to take the ball from him in Washington until Kyle Kuzma gets back today, but that's another story. Jordan Poole looks motivated and ready to have a top 50 season. Jimmy Butler, if he comes back and he plays all of his games, he could reach up to top 25 and he could get there. It's possible. It's more likely that he finishes within the top 40 if things go well. And if things go bad, well, then you're looking at top 80. Yes. Poole could slide down to top 80. It's possible, but it doesn't look likely. Looks like whatever happened with Jordan Poole last season, all of the humbling, and now the subsequent focus on getting him the ball, as long as Kyle Kuzma doesn't come in and really rip the bottom out of this team, Jordan Poole's going to be the guy, and I'll take him over Jimmy Butler for the rest of the season. That's a pretty surprising thing to say here 10 games in. All right. Jordan Butler. I love it. Jimmy Poole and Jordan Butler. If I said that would actually make a lot of sense. Lynn's Angeles. Excellent name right there. Thoughts on Hart versus Markkanen in a trade? This is what it's come to for Lauri Markkanen here, folks. Lauri Markkanen getting mentioned in the same breath as Josh Hart for a trade, and Hart's playing pretty damn well. That's why this trade's popping up. Lauri Markkanen looks really iffy. Like, finish outside of the top 150 on a games played cumulative basis, iffy. And that's kind of where you have to be thinking with a trade like this. Sure, Hart might continue to play well. He might be a top 60 guy the rest of the way. He's not without his own injury risk, but, this configuration in New York, it screams Tom Thibodeau. It screams Josh Hart getting 30 minutes the rest of the way. It has all sorts of opportunity and upside. Like Lauri, if he's playing well, if he's healthy, and if he's getting the ball on a bad team and he's getting it in high volume, he could be a top 30 guy on a per game basis the rest of the way. If he plays 60 games, that works out pretty well for him. He probably finishes in the top 70. Hart, at his current rate, if he keeps going, he probably finishes in the top 70. Hell, he could finish in the top 50 if this happens all season long. And it might. Lauri Markkanen is looking very, very shaky. I probably, based on his upside alone, need to value him as a top 75 guy as a floor, just on the part of this thing that sometimes it just doesn't happen the way that you think it's going to happen. It might just be the case that Lauri Markkanen has a bunch of ticky-tack injuries and finishes with 66 games and finishes inside the top 75. But if things go south, they really go south. I'll end it on this. I think Markkanen I think he could get better than Hart. And I'm also concerned about Hart's injury risk. I will not do this trade. I will hang on to Markkanen, knowing I can try to get more and try to get a better position to trade from, because it's not looking good for Markkanen right now. There's just something going on all of the time. And Utah looks like they really, really want some guy named Flag. K-Tisk asks, trade offered to me, my Jimmy Butler and Vucevic for his Steph Curry. My Jimmy Butler and Vucevic for his Steph Curry. So Vucevic is in a top 10 position right now. We just talked about Butler, so it's Butler day here, which is making sense. Butler on the trip, by the way. And the Heat non-committal whether he will play in the next game, and he gets a big ol' rest until Friday. So I don't think he's playing in this next game, but I could be wrong. Vucevic in a top 10 position, and I kind of think you got to rate these guys as where they'll probably be. They'll probably be top 40 for Vuce, Butler with like top 20 per game productivity when he's good. And then you got Steph, who has enough pop to be a top 5 fantasy guy, but most likely will be inside the back end of the first round as long as he's upright. So you're essentially cashing in 2 players to get one, with the one being a top 20 guy as long as he's upright. And again, I think Steph Curry, who went criminally underrated in drafts, also already dealing with an ankle injury. Those 2 things don't exactly point in the same direction. I think people have a lot of anxiety about Steph Curry, but I think especially with that team having a winning record, it's going to be very hard for that team not to be in the playoff chase. I think that team has an equation that works. I think Steph Curry's at the middle of that equation. I think he's a back-end first-round producer. He just needs to stay healthy. Butler, I do think there are better days ahead for him. I think top 30 and top 30 or 40 for Vucevic is coming. You're asking yourself, can these 2 guys have more value than this one guy? And it's close. And you need one of the 2 guys to stay healthy. And that's not something he's known for. And Vooch has his own set of issues. I think you take the best player in this deal and you run. I think you take Steph Curry. It's not exactly a layup. This isn't an easy one, but have fun with that additional roster spot on your team. Pen2286, Dynasty trade time. Which one do you like more? Giddey and Brook Lopez versus DeJounte Murray and a second rounder. Well, that's basically, we'll chop the second rounder off this thing because it just is, it's just, window dressing at this point. Giddey and Brook Lopez versus DeJounte Murray. I don't think Giddey has it in him as a fantasy player. I think we're getting pretty close to seeing what peak Giddey looks like as a player. Maybe he gets better as a player and certain stats shift certain ways. But I think the name is worth more than the game. Brook Lopez obviously has 1 or 2 more seasons left. I think you take DeJounte Murray and you run. Croc P2424, drop Bub for Melton. Bub got injured, 14-team 9-cat. What do you guys think? Okay, Bub is going to have some moments where he looks great. And the problem with Bub is the efficiencies, and the problem with Bub is the ups and downs. The problem with Melton is he's got a bad back. And they came out guns blazing, and they wanted to show in a primetime matchup what DeAnthony Melton can do for this team as a starter. The answer is very good things. The answer was also an amazing stat line. These are all the things that we love about DeAnthony Melton. If not for his back injury, DeAnthony Melton would be making a lot more headlines as an NBA player than what's going on right now. One of the most dynamic defensive players that we've seen, and fine offensively when you consider that he can connect and he can hit a 3 and he's knowing his role. And that's exactly what you got to do to play for the Golden State Warriors. And they feel like he knows how to play. They don't have to worry about what's going on with Brandon Pajemski, trying to make him into a 3-point shooter. That's not his game. That's going to take a while to cook. And that's probably why Melton's gotten an additional look here from Kerr. He's going to get 25 minutes a game probably the rest of the way, Melton, whether they're starting or coming off the bench. They'll probably plug Melton in wherever they feel like they need to plug in a hole. That said, Melton's risk is considerable. Still, I don't think Bub plays well enough even during the good times to equal where Melton is in the bad times. So I think you take the risk and you try to get a top 75 play out of DeAnthony Melton. Mangle, with an exclamation point, 14-team points league. LaMelo Ball and DiVincenzo versus Mobley and Franz Wagner. LaMelo Ball and DiVincenzo in a points league, and I'll just kind of go with what I think a points league looks like in terms of scoring. Mobley and Franz Wagner. Ooh, that's really juicy. Here's the thing. Dante DiVincenzo is going to be better and better all season long. LaMelo Ball is going to crush Mobley even and Franz Wagner. I'll take LaMelo Ball and Dante DiVincenzo. All right, we're into the live chat here. We got, this is from last episode, I believe. So these won't be on screen. Jim asks, is Nance making the situation in Hawks center rotation a lot worse? Do you change your valuation on both of the centers? I changed my valuation on one of the centers, and that center's name is Onyeka Okongwu. Clint Capella is locked into his role, and he'll have some nights where he's not good, and he'll have some nights where he's very good, but he's just going to be Clint Capella. Onyeka Okongwu reportedly, I think it was Glenn Willis. I forget which beat writer reported this. You could follow the Ethos Hawks pod and probably get the correct answer. And by the way, those guys are killing it. So definitely get that into your pod rotation if you're listening about Atlanta Hawks basketball. The decision to play Larry Nance ahead of Onyeka Okongwu was not injury related 2 games ago. So what does that tell us? Is the injury an issue? And I broke this down on the last show as well. So apologies if you're hearing it for a second time. Is the injury an issue with the foot and the time off? Yes, it is. Absent that, the competition between the two is actually very close. Now, Larry Nance played, and not at the expense of Okongwu, if you consider his low 20 minutes in the last one to be his normal role. Any way you slice this, Nance is making it harder on Okongwu. Okongwu is about 1 or 2 games away from being a drop in most formats where he was considered to be drafted. That's a bad thing for Okongwu, obviously. He's just not getting it done, and that seems to be the story of his career, though it started off so promising with the ability to get defensive stats and have some production elsewhere. He has a little bit of a light switch that only hits 10% of the time where he does everything. And the rest of the time, he does mostly nothing. So there you have it. It's unfortunate because he's been the apple of fantasy community's eye for about 3 years now, and it hasn't really hit. Paolo asks, is it time to stash Isaiah Hartenstein? Yes, in every format. Madness asks, when do we think Asar Thompson's coming back? By the way, we were able to get Asar Thompson everywhere just by reading the injury report. And this is where the move away from content in the industry to not having the comprehensive content has really been an advantage to those from the old school who do a lot of blurbing and things like that. Because when you saw return to injury reconditioning on the injury report as a blurber, you just know something changed here. And what that change was that was reported this morning by everybody, but by Shams first, pardon me, it was that he's been cleared. You don't get to return to injury reconditioning without being cleared. So I was able to go out and sneak Asar Thompson into my bids for $1 or $5 or whatever it was out of 1,000 fab bucks. And it was a little uncomfortable because we didn't have the report yet. Now we have the report. So when do we think he's coming back? I'd say pretty damn soon. Those Ron Holland minutes aren't looking that great, guys. And Detroit, by the way, has been in a ton of close games. With Asar Thompson in the lineup, and I bet they know this, they probably win at least 2 games that they haven't won. And they're trying to win games in Detroit. And I'm trying to win a bet on the over and JB Bickerstaff winning Coach of the Year. Let's do it, everybody. Admiral asks, thoughts on holding Asar and Scoot Henderson 12-team categories? I do see what you're thinking here in that you might need to part ways with one of your so-called stashes. Scoot is going to be good for month-long stretches. We just don't know when that's going to be. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Asar Thompson, if he comes back in a week and we give him the requisite week to kind of get his wheels, his legs underneath him, he could be at a top 100 level, and they need him to be good. In Portland, they don't even know what they're doing. They're trying to figure out ways to fire Chauncey Billups. Scoot's going to be in that wash all season long. And if he can hit the requisite 40% from the field and he can, not kill you in the turnovers, he can be a good efficiency guy, maybe you have something there. I like holding Asar and seeing what we get in 2 weeks rather than holding Scoot Henderson. And hopefully you can turn around and get Scoot Henderson on the other side, though he is definitely overvalued. And Scoot, by the way, as Dr. A so astutely pointed out in the preseason episodes, he had an amazing April. So it's not without risk here. I recognize that Scoot could get it going, but that team is all sorts of messed up. Give me Asar Thompson and I'll take my chances. Marcus, would you do Levine and Siakam for Brunson and Derek White? Okay, Levine and Siakam for Brunson and Derek White. I would get Brunson and Derek White and call it a very good trade for myself, meaning I want Brunson and Derek White. Jack, would you do Laurie and Zubac for Booker and Kobe White 9-cat 14 team? Laurie and Zubac for Booker and Kobe White. Give me Booker and Kobe White and call it a day. Thunder Dan, gnarly. Please rank Asar, Misi, Clowney, Bub in 9-cat dynasty. This is good. I'll go. And the Asar thing, you guys are asking me to predict a blood clot. and he's going to deal with this for the rest of his career. So I'm going to depress his rank here. I will go Misi, Bub, Basar, Clowney. I need to see more from Clowney, and I'm not seeing it. If he does it in the next week or two, I'll change that assessment. But he had a 2-steal, 1-block game. That's all I'm hanging on to right now. He hasn't been able to rise in that mess in Brooklyn. And if he had a little bit more oomph, I think he would. But right now, they're slow rolling it. So that's why I have that the way that I do. Another question. What is Toumani Camara's short-term, long-term outlook? It might be the same. He might be a top 100 guy if all things work well for him. And then if he plays on a good team, things go down from there. Is Brandon Boston Jr. worth rostering in shallow leagues? 9-cat. Only and only if you have a 1-week gap that you need to fill. I believe that's it for questions, folks. We're going to get out of here. We had more questions apparently, but we have to wrap it up. And I'm sorry, I've been actually sick, and we have other things we got to do around here. And I've been shouting at the top of my lungs for 3 hours. But I do appreciate that you guys have more questions. Please do get them into the Discord where we have our pros there ready to answer questions. Go read Keston's article. In fact, read everything that dude writes. If you read everything that dude writes, you will be a better fantasy player. I guarantee it. That's available for free. Go to sportsethos.com, NBA Fantasy Pass layup line. That will get you there. And notice all of the great value that we're putting together for you guys, so you don't have to wade through social media and get bits and pieces all over the place. That's going to do it for us here today, folks. This has been Fantasy NBA Today, presented by Bet Online, a Sports Ethos presentation. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be well.